because if not, again, it biases the studies towards non-significant findings. And the final one, acupuncture treatment adequate. Was the acupuncture treatment adequate is a big issue to look at. I think we can forget about it. Don't look at that. Basically, through the statistical analysis that we found that of all the items on these scales, there were two that presented substantial possibilities for biasing the results. They were really important ones, and I'm going to focus on those two for just a moment. These were a lack of statistical power and a lack of an adequate number of acupuncture treatments. Those were the really important ones. And to show you how just grave a bias lack of statistical power might be, we looked at the 25 studies that you'll see in a moment that did not have significant results. 25 out of the 44 or 47, that's a lot. We calculated the power of those studies that were done. And only 3 of the 25 was their adequate power, meaning they were truly non-significant results. In other words, the other 22 that we found, we don't know if these findings are truly non-significant or it was just too few people that they entered into this study to detect the difference that in reality exists. So you can get an idea of how flawed the studies can be and really give you false interpretations of what's happening with this. We then hypothetically leveled the playing field by saying, let's look at all the studies that had sufficient power and see what they say. Our statistics show that if you had a study with sufficient power, you were 13 times more likely to get a significant finding than a non-significant finding. We then looked at the other major bias, which had to do with inadequate number of treatments. An inadequate number of treatments biases these results towards non-significance or favoring the other treatment. Our results here were also astonishing. We found if you gave 10 treatments, you were 3 times more likely to have a positive finding for acupuncture than a non-significant finding. And then we looked at Steve Birch's hypothesized cutoff of 6 treatments, and we found a threshold effect. And all 13 studies with positive findings all gave at least 6 treatments. Below the threshold of 6 treatments, the chances of getting a positive finding were none. And that really was brought home to me recently when I was asked to review somebody's paper that they submitted to JAMA for this issue. And they did a very well-designed randomized controlled trial for rheumatoid arthritis. And when it got to the acupuncture, they used 1 point to treat rheumatoid arthritis. And so at the end of this, they found that acupuncture didn't work. But how can you even say that when you use, it's like giving 1 dose of an antibiotic and saying, well, it doesn't work for pneumonia. They an adequate number of treatments. So it's a very important factor. So we'll come back to these later on, these 2 themes, the need for enough people in the study and the need for enough acupuncture treatments. Best evidence synthesis, it offers a way of assessing the evidence when the studies are too different in conditions and the outcomes to statistically pool them. You can't do a meta-analysis, really, when things are so different in all the studies as we have for these. So one evidence you can use is best evidence synthesis, which is to pick a threshold of quality and include all the relevant studies that are above that threshold. In a way, it's like using the threshold to pan for gold. It retains what we believe to be the highest quality studies, or the gold, so to speak. And these studies, we can say, we can trust the results of these to be valid and true. So if a study scored high on these checkoff lists that I described, it meets this threshold for best evidence. And in a moment, we'll look at the results for this. We rated each study's results as positive if acupuncture was significantly more effective than control. Negative if acupuncture was significantly less effective than the control. Neutral if acupuncture was not significantly different than the control. And unclear due to a major flaw in the study where we have to say, I really don't know what to make about that. Before I present the results according to the types of control groups, I'll present some overall results that we found. It's important to note that although we included only randomized controls in our review, which is supposed to be the highest standard of research design, we found that within those randomized controlled trials, only 10 of the 44, or less than 25%, could be classified as high-quality studies. That's a little bit better than, I think, the REIT a few years ago, where he said none of them could be qualified as high-quality studies. And then when we did this re-review for JAMA, we found that actually 19 of the 47, or about 40%, could be classified as high-quality studies. But out of the 44 trials, 3 used a waiting list, and we're not going to discuss those further here. Out of the 41 remaining trials, 13 significantly favored acupuncture, 3 significantly favored other treatments, and 25 were non-significant. So we could stop there right now and say, well, 2/3 of the studies showed non-significant results, therefore acupuncture is not effective for chronic pain. Or we can take a closer look at what's going on and ask how much can we trust the results of these studies based on our detectable biases. Remember, the 2 biases we talked about are too few subjects and too few treatments, both of which bias the results towards non-significance. So we start with these, and at this point you need to follow what I'm saying. This is usually about this time of this type of talk, about 10% of you are following what I'm saying, 10% of you are fast asleep, and about 80% of you are having sexual fantasies, so pay attention to that. Acupuncture versus inner controls. If you read the slide vertically, you'll see the number of studies that were classified as having high quality, that's 4, the number of low quality for comparing it to inner controls. 4 of the 8 were high quality. And if you read it horizontally, you see the results rating that each study was assigned. So a plus means a positive finding, a minus means a negative finding, a 0 a non-significant finding, and the findings were unclear. And generally speaking, to make an evidence statement, it's customary that at least 1/3 to 1/2 of the studies point in a particular direction. So in the case of inner placebos, looking at that, we have 50%. So we can say 50% of studies significantly favored acupuncture over placebo. So there's evidence that acupuncture performs better than inner placebo in this group of studies. That's the good news. And these were the conditions that we're looking at. 2 of these, in neck pain and back pain, had positive results. The other 2, osteoarthritis and post-herpetic pain, reported non-significant results. But if you look at the osteoarthritis study, although methodologically it was strong in many areas, it possessed one major flaw in that it lacked the power to detect even a 50% effect difference between control and treatment group. I think there were 12 patients in this study. Therefore, although the improvement rates were 88 and 40% respectively for acupuncture versus sham 10s, the sample size being 12, it failed to reach a significant difference, and therefore we put it down as unclear. In the area of real versus sham studies, we have 20 studies in all. If you read the slide vertically, you can see that only 4 were rated as high-quality studies. Reading it horizontally, we can see that 15 out of 20, or 75% of the sham studies, have either non-significant or unclear results. So, for simplicity, you can say that all 15 of these studies have non-significant findings. So the first thing we can say is that there are so many non-significant findings, we do not reach the evidence threshold of 1/3 to 1/2 positive findings. And we have to say there is not sufficient evidence to make a statement about acupuncture performing significantly better than sham. So now we want to know, how much can we trust these 15 non-significant findings? We want to know how many had sufficient power. We want to know how many had a sufficient number of treatments. Only 2 out of the 15 had sufficient power to detect a significant difference. So only in these 2 can we trust that we are likely to be seeing a truly non-significant finding. The other 13 we can't say for sure because the power was insufficient. We also might want to know about these, how many gave at least 10 treatments. Only 2 out of the 15 gave at least 15 treatments. So we may be looking at both biases in these not significant results. Not enough people and not enough treatments. And these were the areas of these 4 high-quality studies, the sort of gold that we were talking about before. 2 of those, one in fibromyalgia by Duluth, one in migraine by Vincent, had positive findings, and 2 had neutral findings. The trend is here that when all studies are looked at, 20% favor acupuncture, and when we look at just the high-quality studies, 50% favor acupuncture. And now in the acupuncture versus active controls, there were 5 studies using true tens and 8 other randomized controlled trials comparing acupuncture to some other type of standard medical care, such as physiotherapy or drug treatment. Reading this slide vertically, we see that 2 studies met the criteria for high quality. The 1/2 and 1/2 that's shown here is the same study with different results for 2 treatment outcomes. Of the 3 studies which favored the other treatment over acupuncture, only 1 gave at least 10 treatments. Of the 8 studies with non-significant results, the 0 row there, only 1 had sufficient power. So, for the time being, we're left with a group of studies, the majority of which have non-significant findings. We don't know how trustworthy these findings are. So we can only say there's a lack of good evidence to state either for or against acupuncture versus standard care. It's an example of that no evidence means no evidence of effect, not evidence of no effect. If we look at the 2 high-quality studies, one of these osteoarthritis had a positive finding, and the other study, a migraine study, had mixed findings. A closer look at the migraine study by Hess shows that the frequency of the headache was equivalent for both drug and acupuncture. The frequency was significantly reduced in both groups, and one group did not do better than the other. However, the severity of the headache was significantly reduced in the drug group. And then finally, the side effects were significantly less in the acupuncture group. It's sort of what this fellow in Sweden, talks about patients' preferences. He's really talking about the effects of the treatment plus the side effects. That many patients, in their preference, would rather have a drug perhaps that does not work quite as well, but has less side effects. And this is very relevant to the acupuncture.
And how many sessions did they do?
In Hess, it was adequate numbers, I'm not sure. This was actually one of the best studies that we found. I don't remember these. I have it. So, what can we conclude? I'll divide the conclusion into 2 parts. First, on all the studies, and then focus just on the 10 high-quality studies, the sort of nuggets of gold that we're talking about. So based on all the studies, not just the high-quality ones, we conclude that there is evidence that acupuncture performs better than inert placebo, but insufficient evidence that acupuncture performs better than sham or active controls. The evidence is insufficient because the studies were generally too small or too flawed to trust the results. Therefore, we need better design, larger studies to answer this question of therapeutic effect. Does this conclusion mean that acupuncture studies are more terribly flawed than conventional medicine when we look at and take the same methodological quality to them? No, rather we're in the same boat as conventional medicine. The lack of statistical power, which was the gravest design flaw in the acupuncture studies, is also a grave flaw in conventional medicine studies. In fact, we compared our power calculations to those of David Lower and colleagues, who assess respected peer-reviewed medical journals of Lancet, New England Journal, JAMA, and our findings were similar. In the medical journals, he found 16% of the studies with non-significant findings had sufficient power to detect a 25% difference. In our case with acupuncture, only 11% of those with non-significant findings had sufficient power. Both were poor study designs. And furthermore, our overall conclusions are similar to the majority of conventional medical reviews that have been conducted with the same quality control standards. So our conclusions that there is insufficient evidence to prove a therapeutic effect are also the conclusions of 2/3 of 190 conventional medicine systematic reviews that we looked at on the Cochrane Library. And most of these, with insignificant evidence, made statements that their studies were too small and too flawed to make definitive statements. Most concluded that they needed better designed studies. So in a way, we're in the same boat as conventional medicine with these, and it's a very leaky boat that we're looking at right now. If we base conclusions on only the high-quality studies, we can say that the number of high-quality studies is small. It was 10 out of 44. When we did the re-review, we found actually it was 19 out of 47, so it's actually 40% there. Of these 10 high-quality studies, 50% showed positive findings favoring acupuncture, regardless of the type of control group. This is substantial finding that warrants further investigation. Finally, almost all the high-quality studies with positive results were musculoskeletal disorders, and this is a promising area of further research. So I thought to finish this last part is just to give some recommendations from us of how we think we can achieve best validity, how we can really improve these studies. And one part is in the design of the studies, which has to do more with the internal validity of it. How much can we trust our findings? Are we measuring what we think we're measuring, or are we measuring bias? So this has to do with all these methodological issues, ensuring adequate power, doing a pilot study first, seeing the differences, and then going on to a larger study, using parallel designs, and then balancing the time, frequency, and contact when using inner placebos. These are all things that we think can improve the study design, as well as blinding the outcomes assessor, selecting functional and financial as well as pain outcomes. It's multidimensional pain. We need multidimensional assessments of this. Controlling for the co-interventions to make sure it's the treatment that we're measuring, not other treatments that make the difference. Minimizing the dropouts and withdrawals, and ensuring that the allocation, the randomization can be modified. And then in the reporting of studies, which has to do more with the external validity, in other words, whom can we generalize all these findings to? How big a population, what are we looking at here? So these are, for us, this is from Richard Dale about lower back pain, reporting categories that we should have in all study designs. These are the 4 different areas: demographic information, clinical information, treatment description, and outcomes. If we look at those one by one, age and gender should be reported. Referral sources for the patients. We found that there was a significant difference, that there was less positive outcomes for patients that were recruited of these studies I showed you if they came from pain centers as opposed to coming from just general community. It's a totally, even though they both have back pain, it's a totally different group of patients that you're dealing with. In other studies that we looked at, of the 42 studies, only 19 out of 42 reported on all 3 of those. Very basic things that we could do to improve the reporting. The clinical information, duration of pain reported, and then the inclusion and exclusion criteria stated. An example of that would be for back pain. If you include those patients with sciatica and post-surgery pain, sort of failed back syndrome, they did much worse generally than others who didn't have those, poor responders. And then here again, reporting on all those was 22 out of 42 of the studies that we looked at. And treatment information, reporting of the numbers of treatments, the duration of treatments, the frequency, the rotation of needles, chi experience. That might change after listening to the lecture on Japanese acupuncture. I think Bruce Pomeranz and you have to battle that out. and the points used. The ones that we looked at of the 42 studies, only 6 reported on those. So these are very simple things that we could do that would make a big difference in the study's design. And then in the outcome measures, measuring, again, pain functional status. You know, it's a mistake to think because the pain improves that necessarily the functional measure will improve, or that if the functional measure improves, that the pain will improve. They're separate entities, and they both need to be measured. And then very important is the patient's perceptions or psychological measures, such as the coping skills, depression, standard, locus of control, standard measures that we can look at that probably have the most to do with how they actually respond to these treatments. And then cost of care. The numbers that reported on all of those were 0 out of 42. And then finally, for acupuncture information, reporting that, having to do with formula acupuncture versus individual, stating what actually was done, the training of the acupuncturist, the experience in treating it, and the type of acupuncture, electrical versus manual, and styles of acupuncture are all important factors. That's, yeah. We're finished.